Admiral Kevtar stretched lazily in his command chair, watching the stars drift by through the massive viewport of his flagship. The bridge of the Zephyrian dreadnought hummed with quiet efficiency as his crew monitored their patrol of the disputed Kepler 442 system. At over a kilometer long and armed with enough firepower to crack a moon, his ship was just one of 47 vessels in the armada. The Zephyrian Empire's finest war machines, each one a testament to their dominance over this sector of space. Lieutenant Mordak, hunched over his sensor station, suddenly straightened like he'd been shocked. His four eyes widened as he stared at his display, tentacles twitching with excitement. "Admiral, we have incoming contacts," he announced, his voice carrying across the bridge. 12 vessels approaching from the outer system, bearing 27 Mark IV, Kevtar. Didn't even bother to look up from the tactical report he was reading. 12 ships weren't worth his attention when he commanded nearly 50 of the most powerful warships in known space. "Size and classification?" he asked with bored disinterest. Mordak checked his readings twice before responding. "Sir, they're small. Really small. Each one is barely the size of our escort frigates." That got Kevtar's attention. He swiveled his chair toward the main tactical display, and what he saw there made him burst into laughter. The sound echoed through the bridge, deep and rumbling as he took in the pathetic sight before him. 12 tiny ships, he wheezed between chuckles, against our entire battle fleet? Commander Yexnal, standing at the weapons console, joined in the laughter. "They must be lost, Admiral. Probably some merchant convoy that took a wrong turn at the last jump gate. Or maybe," suggested Navigation Officer Peltok with a grin, "some backwater colony thinks they can play soldier with the big boys." The entire bridge crew was chuckling now, the tension of their long patrol finally broken by this ridiculous development. Through the reinforced transparisteel viewports, they could see their own fleet spread out in perfect formation. Massive. Dreadnoughts, heavy cruisers and battle carriers, each one bristling with weapons arrays that could reduce a city to ash in seconds. Kevtar stood up, his imposing figure casting a shadow across the bridge. At nearly 3 meters tall, with armored skin that gleamed under the bridge lights, he was an intimidating sight even to his own crew. "Well, gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had never lost a battle. "It's been a boring patrol. These little ships have just volunteered to provide us with some entertainment." He walked over to the tactical display, studying the approaching vessels with the casual interest of a predator eyeing easy prey. The size difference was almost comical. His flagship alone outmassed all 12 of the unknown ships combined. "Signal the fleet to move to intercept positions," he ordered. "Let's surround these brave little explorers and see what they're made of. Maybe they'll surrender quickly and save us all some time." The bridge crew moved with practiced efficiency, relaying orders throughout the massive armada. 47 war machines began to shift their positions, forming a perfect encirclement around the approaching vessels. Kevtar smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. This was going to be fun. The Zephyrian fleet moved into position like a pack of wolves surrounding their prey. Admiral Kevtar watched with satisfaction as his massive warships formed a perfect circle around the 12 tiny vessels. The unknown ships continued their steady approach, showing no signs of fear or even basic survival instincts. "Communications online, Admiral," reported Officer Beltar from his station. "All channels open and broadcasting." Kevtar straightened. His uniform and activated the main transmission array. His voice boomed across the emptiness of space, carrying the full authority of the Zephyrian Empire behind every word. "Unknown vessels, you have entered Zephyrian territorial space without permission," he announced, his tone dripping with menace. "You are completely surrounded and outgunned. Identify yourselves immediately and prepare to be boarded for inspection, or you will be destroyed where you float." The response came back almost instantly, transmitted on a clear channel with crystal-clear audio quality. The voice was calm, steady, and completely unimpressed by the threat. "This is Captain Jinho of the Terran Defense Force, commanding the exploration vessel Harmony. You are currently in violation of established neutral space agreements. I strongly advise you to withdraw your forces immediately." The bridge fell silent. Kevtar blinked his four eyes in confusion, while his crew exchanged puzzled glances. Terran? None of them had ever heard of such a species. "Run a database search," Kevtar ordered. Find me everything we have on these Terrans and their so-called defense force. Communications Officer Beltar's tentacles danced across his console, accessing the vast galactic database that contained information on every known species, government and military organization in their sector of space. After several minutes of searching, he looked up with a confused expression. Nothing, Admiral. No records of any species called Terrans, no mention of Earth or this Terran defense force. It's like they don't exist. Commander Yexnal scoffed from his position at the weapons console. They're obviously using false identification, probably pirates trying to sound official, or some colony that thinks giving themselves an impressive name will scare us off. Kevtar nodded, his initial confusion turning back into amusement. Of course, these unknowns were lying about their identity. No legitimate military force would send 12 tiny ships against a full Zephyrian battle fleet. He reopened the communication channel, his voice now carrying a note of mockery. Captain Jinho, if that's even your real name, you seem to be confused about your current situation. You have exactly 60 seconds to surrender unconditionally and prepare for boarding. Any attempt to flee or resist will result in your immediate destruction. The response came back just as calmly as before, with no hint of fear or concern in the human captain's voice. Admiral, you are making a serious mistake. I have given you fair warning. This is your final opportunity to withdraw peacefully. The sheer audacity of the statement made Kevtar's crew burst into fresh laughter. Final opportunity? These 12 tiny ships were giving the mighty Zephyrian Empire a final opportunity. Final opportunity? Kevtar roared, his voice echoing through the bridge. You arrogant little insects, you're outnumbered 4-1, outgunned by factors I can't even calculate, and you're giving us ultimatums. He slammed his fist down on the communication console, cutting the transmission. His patience was completely exhausted. All ships, power weapons to full charge. Target the lead vessel. Let's show these mystery aliens what happens when you threaten the Zephyrian Empire. The massive Zephyrian weapons arrays began to glow with deadly energy as they powered up for combat. Plasma cannons the size of city blocks hummed to life, while energy batteries that could melt asteroids charged to full capacity. The sight should have been terrifying to any sane enemy, but the 12 human ships continued their steady approach without even slowing down. Science Officer Dekmar was hunched over his sensor console, his multiple eyes focused intently on the readings streaming across his screens. Something about these readings didn't make sense, and it was starting to worry him. Admiral, he called out, his voice cutting through the battle preparations. I'm getting some very strange readings from those ships. Kevtar barely glanced away from the weapons display. Strange how? Are they powering up weapons, raising shields? No, sir, it's not that. Dekmar's tentacles moved frantically across his controls, double and triple checking his instruments. It's their mass readings. They're completely wrong. What do you mean wrong? Commander Yexnal asked, moving over to look at the science station. Each of those 12 ships is showing mass readings equivalent to our heavy cruisers, Dekmar explained, his voice growing more confused by the second. But they're tiny, a fraction of the size. It's like they've somehow compressed an entire battleship into a corvette-sized hull. The weapons officer paused in his targeting calculations. That's impossible. What kind of materials could achieve that kind of density? I don't know, Dekmar admitted, running another full sensor sweep. The gravimetric readings are off the charts. According to these numbers, each of those little ships should be creating its own gravity well, but they're not. It's like they're made of collapsed matter, but that should be impossible to control. Admiral Kevtar felt a cold finger of unease creep up his spine. In all his years of commanding fleets, he'd never encountered anything like this. Ships were big because they needed to be big. You needed space for weapons, shields, engines, crew quarters, and all the systems that kept a warship functioning. There was no way to make a ship smaller without making it weaker. Run a full structural analysis, he ordered. I want to know what we're really dealing with here. The results that came back made no sense at all. The human ships appeared to be built from materials that didn't exist in any database. Their hulls seemed to bend space around them in ways that violated basic physics. Even more disturbing, the energy reading suggested that these tiny vessels were producing power levels that should require reactors the size of space stations. Sir, Dekmar said quietly, I think we need to reconsider our approach. These aren't normal ships. But Kevtar's pride wouldn't let him back down now. His entire fleet was watching, waiting for orders. He couldn't show weakness in front of his officers, especially not because of some confusing sensor readings. Whatever technology they're using, there are still only 12 of them, he declared, his voice firm with conviction. Numbers don't lie. 47 ships against 12. We have them outnumbered almost 4-1. He turned to his weapons officer. All ships lock targets and fire on my command. The human ships continued their approach, completely ignoring the massive weapons now aimed directly at them. In the depths of space, 12 small vessels faced down an entire battle fleet. And somehow they didn't seem concerned at all. The tension on the bridge was thick enough to cut with a blade. Every officer held their breath as Admiral Kevtar raised his hand, ready to give the order that would end this standoff. The massive Zephyrian weapons arrays glowed like miniature suns, each one capable of vaporizing a small moon. All ships, fire warning shots, Kevtar commanded. Let's see how brave these mystery aliens are when plasma bolts start flying past their hulls. The Zephyrian fleet opened fire with a thunderous display of raw power. Dozens of plasma cannons unleashed their fury, sending streams of superheated energy racing across the void. The shots were carefully aimed to miss the human ships by mere meters, close enough to show the aliens exactly what kind of destruction awaited them if they continued their foolish defiance. The space around the 12 human vessels lit up like a deadly fireworks show. Plasma bolts streaked past their hulls in brilliant streaks of blue and white, each one carrying enough energy to level a city. Any normal ship would have immediately surrendered or fled in terror, but something impossible happened instead. The human ships simply weren't where the plasma bolts expected them to be. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, all 12 vessels had moved. Not the slow, lumbering movement of normal starships, but instantaneous shifts that seemed to defy the laws of physics. What just happened? Commander Yexnal shouted, staring at his tactical display in disbelief. They moved, Navigation Officer Peltok said, his voice barely above a whisper. But that's impossible. Nothing can accelerate that fast without turning the crew into paste. Before anyone could process what they'd just witnessed, Captain Jin Ho's voice filled the bridge again. This time there was a subtle change in his tone. The politeness was still there, but underneath it was something that made every Zephyrian on the bridge feel suddenly cold. Admiral Kevtar, you have just fired on vessels of the Terran Defense Force. That was an act of aggression against a peaceful exploration mission. You have exactly one opportunity to stand down before we respond in kind. Kevtar's pride flared hot in his chest. How dare these unknown aliens threaten him? His fleet had just demonstrated enough firepower to crack a planet, and they were still making demands? Respond in kind? He roared into the communicator. With what? Your 12 tiny ships against our entire battle fleet? You're either insane or suicidal. The human captain's response was calm and measured, but there was something in his voice that made every experienced warrior on the Zephyrian bridge suddenly remember what real danger felt like. You were warned, Admiral. This is your final demonstration. What happened next would haunt Admiral Kevtar's nightmares for the rest of his life. A single beam of energy, impossibly thin and precise, reached out from one of the human ships. It was nothing like the massive plasma bolts the Zephyrians used. This was surgical, elegant and utterly devastating in its precision. The beam struck the Zephyrian flagship's primary weapons array with perfect accuracy. There was no explosion, no dramatic flash of light. The massive plasma cannons simply stopped working. Tons of sophisticated military hardware worth more than most planets' entire economies had been rendered completely useless in less than a second. The bridge fell into stunned silence. Their shields hadn't even registered the attack. Their armor, designed to withstand direct hits from enemy battleships, had been penetrated like it wasn't even there. Damage report, Kevtar whispered, his voice barely audible. Primary weapons. Offline, came the shaky response. Complete systems failure, but sir, there's no structural damage. They somehow disabled our weapons without harming anything else. Captain Jinho's voice returned one final time, and now there was no mistaking the steel beneath the diplomatic words. Stand down immediately, Admiral. The next shot will not be a demonstration. Admiral Kevtar stared at his disabled weapons console, his mind racing to process what had just happened. The most advanced military technology in the Zephyrian Empire had been neutralized by a single, impossibly precise shot from a ship no bigger than a patrol craft. His crew worked frantically to restore their weapons, but every system they checked came back with the same result: complete failure. "Sir, we need to find out who we're really dealing with," Lieutenant Mordak said quietly, his voice tight with worry. "These aren't ordinary aliens," Kevtar nodded grimly. "Access the classified military archives. I want everything we have on advanced civilizations, unknown technologies, anything that might explain what we just saw." Mordak's tentacles flew across his console, diving deep into the most restricted databases in the Zephyrian military network. These were files that contained information too sensitive for regular personnel, reports from the Outer Rim territories, where strange things sometimes happened in the darkness between stars. "Admiral, I'm finding scattered reports," Mordak said, his voice growing more concerned with each file he opened. "Incidents from the Galactic Rim, near the edge of explored space. Korthak's raiding fleets that simply vanished without sending. Distress calls. Hegemony battle groups found weeks later as expanding clouds of debris." Commander Yexnal leaned over Mordak's shoulder, reading the classified reports with growing alarm. "These incidents all happened near systems with yellow stars. Class G main sequence, just like the one these Terrans mentioned." "There's more," Mordak continued, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Survivor reports from merchant vessels that escaped these encounters. They describe ships that move like living creatures, weapons that ignore shields completely, and beings that seem to think 3 steps ahead of everyone else." Science Officer Dekmar pulled up his own set of files, cross-referencing the scattered reports with stellar cartography data. "Sir, these incidents form a pattern. They start from a region near the Outer Rim and move progressively toward Galactic Center, toward us." The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. These weren't random pirate attacks or unexplained accidents. Something had been moving through their galaxy, and now it had reached their doorstep. "What do the reports say about survivors?" Kevtar asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. "That's the strange part," Mordak replied, pulling up another file. "When these unknown ships encounter merchant vessels or civilian transports, they're left completely unharmed. But military fleets that engage them are eliminated completely. No survivors, no wreckage large enough to identify." "Except for one report," Dekmar added, his voice barely audible. "A single escape pod recovered from a hegemony battleship. The pilot was found in a state of complete shock, repeating the same phrase over and over." "What phrase?" Commander Yexnal demanded. "Death Worlders." He kept saying, "The Death Worlders have returned to the stars." The temperature on the bridge seemed to drop several degrees. Every Zephyrian military officer knew the legends of Death Worlds, planets so hostile that they bred natural warriors, beings who learned to fight before they learned to walk. But those were just stories, weren't they? "Cross-reference these. Had reports with the term Terran," Kevtar ordered, his voice steady despite the fear growing in his chest. The search results that appeared on their screens made every officer on the bridge take a step backward. Deep in the most classified files, they found references to a species that called themselves humans, beings from a world called Earth. A death world so extreme that it had produced the most dangerous predators the galaxy had ever seen. "Sir," Mordak said, his voice shaking, "according to these files, every military engagement with humans has ended the same way. Complete tactical superiority, minimal human casualties, and they always offer surrender terms before they begin fighting." Admiral Kevtar looked at the 12 small ships still hovering peacefully in space, and for the first time in his military career, he felt true fear. Admiral Kevtar stared at the classified reports on his screen, his mind torn between the growing evidence of what they faced and his lifelong military pride. 47 of the most powerful warships in the Zephyrian fleet surrounded just 12 small vessels. The numbers had to mean something. They had to. "Sir," Commander Yexnal said quietly, "maybe we should consider their surrender offer. These reports suggest that engaging humans in combat is Unwise. Unwise. Kevtar's voice rose sharply. I have the entire Third Battle Fleet under my command. We represent the military might of the Zephyrian Empire. I will not be intimidated by 12 tiny ships, no matter what ghost stories are hidden in old files. He stood up from his command chair, his imposing figure casting shadows across the bridge. Every eye was on him as he made his decision. All ships, concentrate fire on the lead vessel, full power. If these humans are as dangerous as the reports claim, then we eliminate them here and now before they can threaten anyone else. Admiral, wait, Science Officer Dekmar called out urgently. The energy readings from their ships are spiking. They're powering up something. But Kevtar was beyond listening to warnings. His pride, his reputation, and his understanding of how space combat worked all demanded that he attack. 47 ships could not lose to 12, no matter who was flying them. Fire, he roared. The Zephyrian fleet opened fire with everything they had. Hundreds of plasma cannons, energy beams, and missile launchers unleashed their fury simultaneously. The space around Captain Jinho's ship became a hellstorm of deadly energy, bright enough to be seen from neighboring star systems. When the blinding light finally faded, every Zephyrian on every ship stared in absolute disbelief. The human vessel sat exactly where it had been before, completely undamaged. Not a single scorch mark marred its hull. Impossible, Kevtar whispered. Captain Jinho's voice came across the communication channel, and for the first time there was a note of genuine disappointment in his tone. Admiral Kevtar, you were given every opportunity to avoid this outcome. I had hoped we could resolve this peacefully. There was a pause, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded battles across the galaxy. Captain Minjun, Captain Hiejin, Captain Dongwu, you are authorized to engage. Standard suppression protocols. What happened next changed everything Admiral Kevtar thought he knew about space warfare. The 12 human ships moved. Like nothing he had ever seen before. They didn't accelerate gradually like normal vessels. They simply were in one place, and then they were somewhere else entirely. Their formation flowed and shifted like a school of fish, but with a precision that seemed impossible. They're everywhere. At once! Navigation Officer Peltok screamed, his voice cracking with panic. The human ships weren't fighting like individual vessels. They moved as one entity with 12 bodies, anticipating each other's actions with perfect timing. When one ship engaged a Zephyrian cruiser, another would already be moving to support it before the first shot was even fired. How are they coordinating like that? Commander Yexnal demanded, watching his tactical display with growing horror. The first Zephyrian ship died with surgical precision. A beam of energy, impossibly focused, struck the heavy cruiser's power core. There was no massive explosion, no spectacular fireball. The ship simply went dark, its systems failing one by one in perfect sequence. They're not trying to destroy us, Dekmar said with dawning realization. They're disabling our ships. They could kill us all instantly, but they're holding back. And that restraint somehow made them even more terrifying. Zephyrian ships began falling silent across the formation, their crews helpless as human precision turned their mighty fleet into floating debris. The battle, if it could even be called, that continued with terrifying efficiency. Admiral Kevtar watched in horror as his mighty fleet was systematically dismantled by 12 ships that shouldn't have posed any threat at all. Each human vessel moved with impossible grace, their weapons reaching out to disable Zephyrian ships with surgical precision. Science Officer Dekmar was frantically analyzing every scrap of data his sensors could gather, trying to understand what they were really facing. What he discovered made his blood run cold. "Admiral," he called out, his voice shaking, "I'm getting readings that don't make sense. These human ships, they're not just advanced, they're operating on completely different principles than anything we understand." "What do you mean?" Kevtar demanded, watching another of his cruisers go dark on the tactical display. "Their hulls appear to be made from materials that bend space-time itself," Dekmar explained, his tentacles dancing frantically across his controls. "The energy signatures suggest they're using controlled gravitational fields as both propulsion and defense. That's why our weapons can't touch them. They're not just deflecting our shots, they're redirecting them through folded space." Commander Yexnal stared at the science officer in disbelief. That's impossible. You'd need the computational power of an entire planet just to calculate those kinds of field interactions. That's not even the worst part, Dekmar continued, pulling up another set of readings. Look at their power output. Each of those tiny ships is generating more energy than our entire fleet combined. They're running miniature stars in their engine cores. The implications were staggering. The Zephyrians had always believed that bigger meant stronger. Their massive dreadnoughts were built that way because they needed the space for enormous reactors, weapons systems, and all the infrastructure required to keep a warship functioning. But the humans had somehow compressed all of that power into ships a fraction of the size. How is that even possible? Weapons Officer Naltek asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I think they've mastered technologies we've never even dreamed of, Dekmar replied. Controlled fusion at the molecular level. Materials engineering that lets them build with the strength of neutron star matter. Computational systems that might be quantum-based or something even more advanced. On the main screen, they watched Captain Boram's ship execute a maneuver that defied every law of physics they knew. The human vessel seemed to phase in and out of reality, appearing just long enough to disable another Zephyrian cruiser before vanishing again. They're not even trying, Commander Yexnal said with dawning horror. Look at their formation, they're casual about this. We're throwing everything we have at them, and they're treating it like a training exercise. The truth was even more humbling than that. The human ships weren't just superior in technology, they were superior in every way that mattered in combat. Their reaction times suggested that their crews either had reflexes far beyond normal biological limits, or they were enhanced, in ways the Zephyrians couldn't imagine. Admiral, Dekmar said quietly, I don't think these are just better ships. I think we're looking at an entirely different level of civilization. It's like Stone Age warriors trying to fight jet fighters. Another Zephyrian vessel went silent, its systems disabled by a weapon beam so precise it could target individual components without damaging anything else. The humans weren't just winning, they were demonstrating a level of control that suggested they could have ended this engagement in seconds if they had wanted to. They're showing mercy, Kevtar realized with growing desperation. They could destroy us all instantly, but they're choosing not to. They're disabling our ships instead of vaporizing them. The most terrifying part wasn't the technology gap or the tactical superiority, it was the restraint. These humans possessed godlike power, and they were using it with the careful precision of surgeons rather than the brutal efficiency of conquerors. The systematic destruction of the Zephyrian fleet continued with clockwork precision. Admiral Kevtar could only watch helplessly as ship after ship in his once mighty armada fell silent, their systems disabled by weapons that seemed to ignore every defensive measure they possessed. Captain Sungmin's human vessel danced through the Zephyrian formation like a deadly ghost, its weapons reaching out to touch 3 different cruisers simultaneously. Each beam found its target with impossible accuracy, shutting down engines, weapons, and life support systems in perfect sequence. The crews aboard those ships were left alive but completely helpless, floating in the darkness of space. Admiral, we've lost over half the fleet, Commander Yexnal reported, his voice hollow with defeat. 31 ships disabled with minimal damage to their hulls. The humans they're being careful not to kill anyone. That restraint made everything worse somehow. If the humans had simply opened fire with devastating weapons, it would have been a massacre that could be explained by superior firepower. But this surgical precision, this ability to disable without destroying, showed a level of control that was almost contemptuous. On the tactical display, Captain Hyojin's ship performed what could only be described as impossible maneuvers. It moved in 3 dimensions simultaneously, folding space around itself to appear in multiple locations at once. Zephyrian gunners couldn't even track it properly, let alone target it with their weapons. How are they moving like that? Navigation Officer Peltok demanded, staring at his instruments in disbelief. They're violating basic physics. I don't think they're bound by the same physics we are, Science Officer Dekmar replied quietly. Their ships exist in a different relationship with space-time. They're not moving through space so much as reshaping it around them. The human formation flowed like liquid mercury, each ship supporting the others in a dance of destruction that seemed choreographed by some divine intelligence. When one vessel engaged a target, another would already be positioning itself to handle the next threat. They anticipated each other's actions with perfect timing, as if they shared a single mind. Admiral Kevtar's flagship shuddered as another human beam found its mark, shutting down their secondary weapons array. The bridge lights flickered as backup power systems struggled to compensate for the precise damage. "Sir, incoming transmission from the human flagship," Communications Officer Beltar announced. The main screen activated, showing Captain Jinho's calm face. He looked tired, almost sad, as if this entire engagement had been a regrettable necessity rather than a battle. "Admiral Kevtar," he said, his voice carrying across the bridge with quiet authority. "You have fought with courage, but this engagement is over. Your fleet is defeated. I'm prepared to accept your surrender." Kevtar looked around his ruined bridge, at the tactical display showing his fleet reduced to helpless hulks drifting in space. 47 of the most powerful warships in the Zephyrian Empire had been neutralized by 12 vessels no bigger than escort frigates. "My crew," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What happens to my crew?" "They will be treated with honor," Jinho replied immediately. "I'm transmitting coordinates to the nearest neutral trading station. Your ships retain life support and basic propulsion. You can reach safety within 3 days." The human captain leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but not unkind. "Admiral, you faced an enemy you didn't understand, fighting a war you couldn't win. There's no shame in surrender when the alternative is meaningless death." Kevtar closed his eyes, feeling the weight of command and the responsibility for thousands of lives under his care. When he opened them again, his decision was clear. "I surrender," he said, the words tasting bitter but necessary. The Zephyrian Third Battle Fleet surrenders unconditionally. Around him, his officers sagged with relief and defeat, knowing that their admiral had just saved all their lives. Captain Jinho accepted the surrender with the quiet dignity of someone who had seen too many battles and taken no pleasure in any of them. True to his word, detailed coordinates appeared on every Zephyrian ship's navigation system, showing the route to Haven Station, a neutral trading post where they could receive medical aid and repairs. "Your wounded will be given priority treatment," Jinho assured Admiral Kevtar. "The station has been notified of your arrival. They're expecting you." As the defeated Zephyrian fleet began limping away from the battlefield, their ships barely functional but alive, Captain Jinho made a decision that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. He opened a communication channel that broadcast on every known frequency, reaching every inhabited system within 100 light years. "To all who received this transmission," he began, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority, "I am Captain Jinho of the Terran Defense Force, commanding the exploration vessel Harmony. Today, humanity has returned to this region of space after a long journey from our home system. On ships and space stations throughout the sector, alien communications officers scrambled to record every word. This was the first official contact with the mysterious humans that had appeared in their space. "We come seeking peaceful coexistence with all sentient species," Jinho continued. "We have no desire for conquest or domination. We ask only for the right to explore, to trade, and to coexist in harmony with our galactic neighbors." He paused, and when he spoke again, there was steel beneath the diplomatic words. "However, we will defend ourselves and our interests when threatened." Today's engagement with the Zephyrian fleet was conducted with full restraint. We disabled rather than destroyed. We captured rather than killed. The transmission showed the 12 human ships in formation, small and seemingly insignificant against the vastness of space. But every alien who saw that image now understood what those modest vessels truly represented. "Do not mistake our mercy for weakness," Jinho warned. "Do not mistake our small numbers for vulnerability. We are the children of Earth, a world that tried to kill us every day of our evolution. We learned to survive by becoming stronger, faster, and smarter than anything that hunted us." In the background of the transmission, the wreckage of 47 disabled Zephyrian warships drifted silently, providing stark evidence of humanity's capabilities. "The galaxy is vast enough for all of us," Jin-Ho said, his tone softening slightly. There are countless worlds to explore, endless opportunities for trade and cooperation. We hope to build friendships with species who share our vision of peaceful coexistence. His expression grew serious one final time. But for those who choose the path of aggression, who mistake our desire for peace as an invitation for exploitation, remember what you have witnessed here today. Remember that humanity has mastered technologies you cannot comprehend, developed weapons you cannot counter, and trained warriors you cannot defeat. The transmission began to fade as the human ships prepared to depart. We are small in number, but vast in capability. We are few, but we are mighty, and we have returned to the stars with both open hands and closed fists, ready for friendship or prepared for war. The 12 ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving behind a galaxy that would never again underestimate the power that could be contained in small packages. Admiral Kevtar, limping home with his defeated fleet, would spend the rest of his career telling anyone who would listen the same simple truth: never laugh at the human's tiny fleet, because size means nothing when you're dealing with the apex predators of the galaxy. The age of human expansion had begun, and the universe would never be the same.